welcome to Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and a casual movie fan watch movies in the cinematic canon. Today's film is Rosemary's Baby, directed by Roman Polanski, starring Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes. My name is Cameron Tuttle, and I'm joined with Isaac Ransom. Isaac, how are you doing?
Woo! It's horror month, baby. Do you like that reverb? I'm in a different room than I am normal.
It sounds like you're in a spooky corridor.
Yeah, I'm in a scary dungeon for all you audio listeners. Technically, this room doesn't have any windows, but I'll tell you, it's brighter than the sun in here. All the walls are white, and everything is like, it's like I've been taken to the afterlife. I'm in heaven at this point, so not
or King's Cross Station.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about, but
yeah, I know. I was going to say it's like the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, where it's like, and if you'll notice that this room has no windows and no doors.
Yeah.
You know? That's where you are.
That's me, except there's plenty of doors. There's plenty of... Anyways, yeah,
right,
we could go on and on. I'm good, Cameron. I'm excited to start Horror Month with you. I know that the fans of the show are excited. The Patreons are excited. We've got lots of messages. We are pumped up to be doing this. I'm genuinely spooked and curious. I think my relationship with horror films is very weird because for a long time I was too scared to watch any of them, and then I kind of took this class in college about sci-fi and horror and realized that like some of horror and what happens in horror movies, right, is like really unique with the genre. They're exploring like the power of mystery or like, playing with the audience's expectations. And then there's all this neat commentary happening at the same time. And so I kind of learned about it in this technical sense. And then I was, more interested in exploring it. Then I learned like the power of comedy with horror. And then we had our first year in Cinema Spectator with it, and it was a great month. I'm excited to get into this one with you, Cameron. Now that I feel like I'm a little bit more explored in this region, but still unsure, a little bit nervous about it still, especially after watching this film, which we will get into. But how you feeling about Horror Month, Cameron?
I'm excited about it. It's weird because I kind of agree with you. I was never really that into horror movies. I'm less so for the fact that I was like scared of them or whatever. I mean, I didn't really watch them. My family didn't watch them growing up, so it wasn't really something that I had grown accustomed to. And then kind of like in high school, I started watching more horror movies, and not just horror movies, but like different weirder movies, things that were more unusual than sort of, your standard Hollywood blockbuster or whatever else. And horror had always stood out to me as being very either one way or another, like very much interesting and deep and lots of, like you said, mystery and kind of exploring dark themes, exploring this sort of underbelly of emotion or underbelly of, what people can feel towards each other. And then on the other end, it was total schlock, it totally has the two divides of being like, on one side, it's very deep and very interesting and sometimes can be very moving. And on the other, it is just complete schlock and totally useless and has no bearing on, being. So I always had associated horror with, those kinds of things like this, the Sinister movies or the very like you go like PG-13 horror movies that you go to in high school with your friends or whatever, like that's what I always associated with as like modern horror movies. And kind of when I started exploring more old movies and exploring movies that came out of, I guess, kind of the time period that we're talking about today, the 60s and 70s, that's when I started to really appreciate horror movies. And then, since then, there actually have been a lot of recent horror movies that have kind of had a resurgence. I would say that have great artistic value and that actually deserve to be sort of in the canon of great movies, regardless of if they're horror movies or not. I think my expectations, it's a genre that I didn't really like before. And so my expectations have changed along with it. And I think it's worth, if you're not a horror fan, and I know a lot of people aren't, I think it's actually worth exploring to some degree certain movies of this time period that, we'll be talking about. I would say for most of the month, maybe. We haven't really locked down um, the exact movies yet, but I would say a lot of these movies come from this time where themes are being explored in a relatively deep way. They're allowed to show things on screen that are a little bit more intense, and they're kind of allowed to have this freedom in a way that makes things interesting. And still, it's not today's horror movies. They're not gonna scare the pants off of you, but they're also reflective of things that were happening at the time. And so I think they're totally worth visiting still. If you're hesitant about horror movies, watch old horror movies is what I would say.
Yeah, I'd actually agree with that. I felt like my, I guess, academic introduction to it explored like really old films like Nosferatu, which is like black and white and you can barely see it. The film is so grainy, right? But there was all like a purpose behind slowly doing those kind of movies into stuff that's a little bit more modern. And I think what's interesting about horror is that there's something sort of like I know so many people that are polarized on the subject, right? They're like, I hate horror movies or I love them. And I used to be one of those people. And I I think that most people actually don't hold a polar opinion, whether or not they say they do or they don't. And it came with the realization when I was studying horror films, where like I realized that I know this is maybe a little bit of a stretch for some people, but like technically, the cartoon Scooby Doo is like one of the best collections of horror, like in terms of like hitting all the check marks, balancing like
Yeah.
comedy with mystery and also like the suspenseful elements and all these things. And I was like, wow, I've always enjoyed that show from like an extremely young age. And I was drawn to the elements that are fundamental to the show, but those are the fundamentals of like all horror. And so
Yeah.
like you'll see some of those aspects kind of crawl their way into things that have like mass appeal. I mean, last week we talked about the movie Parasite, which I think blends horror elements into the movie. Most people would probably consider that like a thriller drama, but there are definite scenes in that movie that are like some of the best horror setups that I've seen, and they're gonna stick with me. I mean, we talked
Yeah.
about the shot of the film and whatnot, right? So if like horror isn't your genre, if you hate spooky Halloween time and all that stuff, you know, I would encourage you loosen up a little bit. Like you actually probably do enjoy some horror in some aspects. I mean,
Yeah.
a perfect example is my dad, who says that he will not watch horror movies, but like last year when we were doing this section, I was telling him, he was like, "Oh, you're such a disgrace, son, watching horror movies." He's the one that was like, "But if you haven't seen Halloween, we should really watch it." And I was like, "What? Like,
Mm.
is this really coming out of your mouth?" And so we watched this movie, and he's like, "Oh, this was so scary when I was in high school." And then he talked about how much he loved like John Carpenter's music, and we were talking about how like we watched The Thing for the podcast and all this stuff. And I was like, "Oh my goodness!" Like my dad, who basically like says all horror movies are evil, like is telling me how much he enjoys The Thing and Alien and John Carpenter's Halloween and stuff. And it's like, wow, like I think it's a genre that is easily like spit down on and underappreciated. And I
Yeah.
think that's why giving a month to it is exciting. You have anything to add to that, Cameron? I know this is kind of an introduction, but I think it's fun to kind of sit on it for a second.
No, I totally agree. I think horror, like you said, is totally underrated in a lot of ways, and people don't give it the chance that they should. And I would say horror movies aren't really all that much about scaring you in the sort of, they shouldn't be about sort of startling you. They should actually be about scaring you, which is a deeper feeling, a more intense feeling, something that kind of lasts with you for a while. And I would say that's what all cinema is striving towards, is making you feel something, not in the immediate, in the sort of, here's a great example of this actually, and then we can move on. You've always seen, you know this scene, right? There's two characters and they don't have any chemistry with each other, but the music swells and you're supposed to believe that they're falling in love and blah blah blah. That is what a jump scare is in a horror movie, right? It's using sort of the environment to start to trick your brain into thinking that you're scared when you're actually not. You actually don't believe it. But a true horror movie, a truly something that will deeply unsettle you, or something that will sort of rock you, not just for a moment, not just for a jump scare, is something that, is set up and takes time and maybe doesn't even have jump scares, and will sit with you and linger with you for, maybe forever. So that's my take on horror movies. Let them, don't be scared off by the schlock. There's good stuff in there.
Also, if you like funny movies, I feel like horror movies have a very special place for you as well. I mean, we talked about Evil Dead a little bit. Like some of the funniest moments in films happen in a horror context. And there's definitely the campy side, but there's also like this battle between like, tension and the release in tension with comedy, right? So if you're interested in sort of my earlier exploration of film, which Cameron has run me through with this podcast, last year in October, we did a bunch of great films. You can check that out here. Cameron, before I get into your hot take, which we've been doing at the beginning of each episode, we've been forgetting to talk about what we've been watching lately. And I was wondering if you've had any time to watch anything. We haven't done this segment for a couple weeks, and so I feel like we actually have something to talk about. So you shoot first.
Yeah. So I finished season 2 of Fargo. Still amazing. I loved it. I think that show is actually really excellent. At least the first 2 seasons that I've seen. Me and Kiana started Squid Game. We watched the first episode, and I'm sure we'll continue on. It was good, but I don't really have anything more to say other than, I'm interested, and I don't have too much on it because it's the pilot. We're just sort of getting started. So,
yeah.
And then other than that, I did watch, I rewatched Mad Max Fury Road with Juzo in the theaters. It was amazing. Our first time going back to the Alamo Drafthouse in like almost 2 years now,
wow.
Which is crazy. It feels like it's been way too long. But it was just an awesome time. We had such a fun time.
Yeah.
Like that movie it reminded me a lot because we saw that for the first time together.
We did,
in the theaters in 2015 when it came out. And I was telling Juzo about the story of like, we didn't even know what it was. We kind of just walked into the theater and picked something at random. Mm-hmm. And, it blew us all away, and we were so into it. So it was good to relive that, good to kind of have that, that experience again. Other than that, I was talking about Returnal, the game that I was playing. I platinumed it finally.
Very nice.
I deleted it off my console. Oof. And then I'm playing through The Last of Us 2 right now. And it's very good. It kind of goes with the theme of horror movies, actually. So
yeah, I saw you playing that on PlayStation. I was like, oh, it's about time for Cameron to get back into some depressing video games. So
I was just having too much fun.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think of it. I don't know if you have much to add on your initial impressions, but.
I replayed The Last of Us a little while ago, and I feel like right now it's an excellent expansion of the story. It feels very similar. The jumping from Returnal to The Last of Us, it was a little bit hard because it kind of chugs, in terms of like how weighty you feel, gameplay wise. But I've gotten used to it, and the stealth is like awesome. It's so good. And there's sequences in this game that have kind of blown me away with the amount of interaction in a lot of ways that you don't really find with other Naughty Dog games. Although, to be fair, it is very linear, which is to be expected. But at the same time, I felt a lot more that you can kind of experiment with things, and it gives you a little bit more freedom than the first game, I would say. And in a lot of ways, I find myself kind of ignoring a lot of enemies and kind of sneaking my way past. I'm playing pretty stealthily. I'm also playing on hard, so it's kind of hard to go guns blazing because there's not enough ammo. But it's I think it's a lot of fun. It's a very dark game, and it has unsettled me in a lot of moments, in a way that you've played The Last of Us. It's like that game is dark and it's very kind of depressing, but it's still fun. It's still a good game, and kind of the gameplay is very hooking. This game is very dark.
Yeah.
It makes you feel it. So I'm excited to finish it, and I think I'm almost halfway through. So
Mm.
you know,
Well, I know that, usually we don't linger on video games too far, but The Last of Us Part 2 has been one of the most divisive and story-driven versions of like a video game ever to exist. It sparked a
yeah,
lot of conversation. I think there's a lot of narrative push in it. The first game had an attention to, or I guess maybe like more of a theme dialed in about hope, which is usually a pretty well tread uh, ground in apocalyptic movies. And this game I know has some heavy themes of anger and revenge, and so I have not had any interest to play something this depressing. But it is interesting to see the public response to this game when it came out. I have not wanted to visit it because of the conversation around it, and I'm actually interested to play it much later, when people have stopped talking about it. I could just take it in and embrace it for what it is. And I don't know.
yeah.
I'm curious to get your final takes on it when you finish it. But yes, this is not a video game podcast. This is a movie podcast. I
You wouldn't
recently
know.
I recently watched the Hunger Games, the first Hunger Games, with my dad randomly.
Hmm.
It was a very fun experience. I had forgotten basically what that movie was like at all, and it actually holds up pretty well. I think it was I think it was fun to re-explore. It's so interesting to dive into like these like teen driven like dramas that people were just totally into at the time. That was such a like
Yeah.
20 teens like moment for people. But the Hunger Games, I read all those books, and it's kind of neat to see like how creativity has, like, they were trying to be creative with not really knowing if the movie was going to be a success. And the first one has a lot of shaky cam and some interesting choices in the way that it's put together. I think that movie has surprisingly lasted a long time.
Oh, there's
so.
a dog.
Hi, Sadie. I don't know how she got in here. I only shut 2 doors to make sure she didn't. So um, she just kind of does what she wants, I guess. She just blasts through every All right. Well, yes, that was Juliana's family dog, Sadie. Yeah, so I watched that, and I watched I don't know if I've been watching anything else. I thought I had something else to talk about. Oh, well, we're going to talk about that for the Patreon episode. We haven't recorded the Patreon one yet. But yeah, I was like, wow, I actually watched something. I should talk about that on my podcast. Usually we don't. This is Cinema Spectator. We talk about movies, we promise, and we talk about the movie that's in the title. You can support us at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Throw a couple dollars our way. Get exclusive benefits like a exclusive episode, having questions read on air, being able to vote on what movies we watch each month. A lot of people are excited to vote for Horror Month. So if you want to get in on that, you can join the vote. We're trying to put the poll up as early as possible so you guys can start voting and get your say in on what we're going to watch in Horror Month. If you don't have a few dollars, it's all good. You can support us by giving us a rating on iTunes, tell friends and family, subscribe to it on Spotify, repost our stuff on social media. We're at ECFS Productions on all platforms. So talk to us there, message us. We'd love to get to know you. We love the fact that you're supporting the show. Cameron, I think it's time to actually get into the movie now. It's 20 minutes in. I'm going to shut this door because I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to lock it. I'm going to make sure that the dog doesn't come back in. But
Yeah, lock it. Well, yeah. This week, as we mentioned, we watched Rosemary's Baby, and it's kind of an interesting one because it comes early on in terms of. So I would say, we watched, I guess, The Exorcist, which was 1971 or 73 or something, and we also watched Psycho, which was 1960. So this was kind of in between them, kind of when horror movies and movies in general were maturing, I would say, in a lot of ways. Things were getting much more dark. The code had ended in 1958. So this was kind of a wave of movies in the 60s that, you think of something like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, or um, Psycho is actually a very good example of this. These movies that were kind of elevating the genre in a way that hadn't been seen because of censorship. And then I would say, obviously, there's a swing and then a swing back. So I would say in the 80s, kind of it swung back and things were terrible again. But in the 60s and 70s, I think there was a large run of movies brought on by guys like Polanski, like Francis Ford Coppola, like Scorsese, these guys who kind of took the genre, took influences from France, took influences from worldly movies, and were able to elevate things in a new way. And I think Rosemary's Baby is a great example of this, as sort of an early example of maybe new Hollywood picking up a genre that had kind of been maybe long dead, or sort of not. It was at the end of Hitchcock's largest reign, kind of picking it up, dusting it off, putting a new spin on things, taking influences from foreign movies and making it this kind of interesting new project that was somewhat offensive for the time, that was somewhat a bit out there, and it wasn't, this isn't a movie necessarily that has a lot of thrills per se in terms of what you would traditionally think of, but it's a movie that is kind of a good example of what I was talking about, where it's dealing with things that are much more in some ways, I guess, psychological, and things that are scarier on not just the superficial level, but a deeper level, sort of maybe a more meaningful level. So, yeah, that's kind of my brief introduction. Roman Polanski, obviously, this is kind of one of his breakout movies. He did another one in 1965. I forget the name of that. I should know it, but yeah, this was actually, I do want to talk about this because there's kind of an interesting story about this movie and the context of it, within Roman Polanski's life. A lot of people consider this movie to be cursed. And whether or not you take that seriously is your deal. But there was a lot of people associated with the movie that ended up, things went poorly for them in the coming years after this, and Polanski especially was obviously very troubled in his younger years. He was a person who escaped the concentration camp in Poland. He's someone who he literally walked through the forest to escape a concentration camp. And so, he was someone who came from a kind of a dark past. And then, the year after this, 1969, is when the Manson murders happened. And that was at his house with his then pregnant wife. So that kind of colors this movie, maybe not this movie necessarily, but some people consider this movie to be a little bit, have a reputation for leaving a stain on certain people who were involved in the movie. So I just want to point that out because, it's a little spooky, and I don't know if I believe in that necessarily. Seems superstitious to me, but I will say it's interesting that there's, I guess there's reverberations from this movie that carried on in real life. So yeah, that's my intro.
Yeah, it's interesting to put some context around the director, because this movie it's it openly talks about how God is dead in this film, right? And some of you might know that, I personally have a Christian faith and whatnot, and it's despite, maybe what some people feel about religion or, Christianity or things like that, that's actually not something you hear super often in a lot of forms of media or art, or it's usually tied to something, or at least maybe the art that I consume. And the last time I actually remember hearing something like that was reading the book Night from was it Eli Wiesel or something like
Yeah.
that, right? The
Yep.
the Holocaust book. And so it was interesting because that was the first thing I thought of when watching this movie. I was like, wow, I haven't heard, I guess, some sort of art form talk about, God being dead so aggressively since I read a book about the Holocaust back in high school. And so it's crazy. I didn't know anything about this director being related to the Holocaust or escaping it or something like that. And yeah, I mean, that seriously has some trauma reading through the Night and stuff. Like, that's some heavy stuff. And to then be
Yeah.
linked to the Manson murders, it's like, wow. Yeah, I had no context for anything like that. I just thought whoever made it was quite cynical, and I understood that, right?
Sure. I
This
think that's true. Although I will say, I don't think the movie's perspective is that God is dead. But I think we can get into that when we get to our interpretations. I think actually this movie takes the thought of evil very seriously, and that's one thing that is probably due to the fact that he had such a traumatic past, and uh, that's different from saying so. Saying that evil is like taking evil very seriously is a different perspective than nihilism, which I think is the God is dead perspective, I guess. So, and I think there is something. I think there is something deeply seriously contemplative about this movie. I don't think it's dismissive at all of evil or of good, either. So
Well, I mean, I'll just say it out flat right. My impression of this film is very mixed. I didn't necessarily like it. I think there were some of my own subjective feelings about coming through. I mean, with my own personal faith and whatnot, in this movie just kind of seeming to cross lines and then move into a level of camp that I was just kind of confused by. It clearly has a lot of things it wants to say, and it makes it clear throughout the movie that it's trying to itch at things, whether it's a conversation around, you know, medicine or women in pregnancy, or, her boyfriend being like this total sleaze guy who's trying to become famous, right? There's so many little aspects of the plot that are trying to comment on society at that time. It just didn't connect in a way that for me personally that I felt engaged with. And I think part of it was the execution of the mystery in the film, because I felt that the movie reveals a lot of things early on that are pretty clear setups, and I don't think it's really trying to hide that, but it left me sort of um I guess almost kind of bored in some ways. I was like, I think they are like I'd come to conclusions about sort of where the film was going, and then when it went there, I was like, okay, like, and so I was longing for the movie to explore a little bit of, I mean, not to get straight into spoilers, but the ending felt like, to me, I was like, I almost wish that they left it a little bit like even further open ended,
mhm.
where it was like, is she crazy or is she not? Right? That would have been more
Yeah,
exciting
yeah,
for me than this almost absurd. Like, the ending is just whack. Okay, and I felt like not only is it like kind of goofy, but there was also like a personal side of me that was like, do I really want to be watching a movie where all the people are saying "Hail Satan"? Okay, like maybe it is supposed to be funny, but there was a side of me that was like, it's kind of irritating to me. Like it's not, and so it's interesting for me to hear you say like, oh, this movie takes evil seriously when at the same time it's sort of funny at the end. It's so ridiculous and goofy, and there's that Asian guy running around taking pictures and stuff, and I'm
Uh,
just like,
I would say that's probably more of a modern perspective, the goofiness of it, because I think probably in 1968 it would have been very shocking, that scene. Though I will agree with you, and structurally I don't think it makes a lot of sense either, to end the movie that way. But I like you said, I don't really want to get into spoilers right away. But I'm actually in agreement with you a lot that the movie kind of uh there would be something interesting about it leaving it open, although to be fair, that's not necessarily, I don't think the mystery was the focus of the movie. I think uh in some ways you're supposed to feel that what's happening is inevitable. There's something suspicious about what's going on. There's some, she feels it very early. She feels that there's something off very early. But it's almost like she's unable to come to the realization that yes, there actually is something very off until the end, until she is running around trying to hide from everybody. But I do agree in some ways that, like, I think if you left it with almost like a Last of Us ending, the original Last of Us,
yeah,
if you kind of left it like that, where part of you knows that this isn't real, that this is real, but she doesn't want to believe it or something. I think that could be interesting. So yeah, I don't disagree.
and just like to kind of continue on my train of thought, I felt that like that's what really began to irk me is that like a lot of movies when I watch them I can kind of like, especially with the last few films, right, that we've done in Korean Cinema Month, which have just been excellent. I think it's been so fun to explore that stuff. I I felt like this film was was this experience in watching it where I was wishing that it would do other things almost at all times. And I haven't had that kind of like frustration in a movie in a long time. I know that there's been a conversation about watching movies where it's like you can't have expectations, but sometimes when I watch a movie, it's almost like I can't believe they're missing some opportunities, you know? And I would say the ending is one. I would say that this movie is gorgeous. It's on Technicolor, which we've had conversations about in the past, and it does some really, you know, neat um it has moments like there's one really early on with a dresser, right? That's blocking a door and there's like this mystery behind it and it's kind of like you want to know what's happening and they just kind of sterilely show what goes on with it. You know, it's very like I really wish that there were moments that were like I was like, man, like I really want to be intrigued by this and they just kind of, oh, you know, that's just a thing there and I'm like, well, I want to kind of chew on that for a long time. I want to be like I want to be intrigued more. I want to be pulled in more. And you're right. I don't think the mystery is the point. But when you have so many good elements that could have been awesome, you know, at small moments like at the beginning where they talk about they're in the laundry room and they're like, "Oh, this place is creepy." I'm like, "Oh, this is gonna be such a great moment when they go back to the laundry room." And there's nothing. They never go back to it, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I just felt like I just kind of felt frustrated overall. I definitely missed a lot of the effectiveness of this film. I missed a lot of what maybe people love about it, and in the end, felt just kind of like empty with it. I was like, well, you know, that's just one of those movies, I guess, and I don't care for it, you know. And so
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sad to report like that's how it came down. I think it was a mix of things. I think some of it might have been, you know, subjective opinion. I was texting our executive producer Darren. I was like, man, like I just don't like none of that like Satan voodoo stuff. Like that's just not my cup of tea when it comes to horror. Like you want to talk about a creepy monster, a serial killer, like some sort of mystery alien or something like that, or that's like I'm drawn to that kind of thing. Even some like weird witch magic, but when you start talking about like the devil and all that, I'm like, nah, 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 Jesus, amen, get that crap away from me. I'm not about that, and so like yeah, we had an interesting just text about that. And so I think there's a subjective side to this film where I was like, I was never going to like it just because of some of the content. But also, even the parts that I was drawn into felt like they fell really flat for me. And for the ending to be like almost comical for me at some points, to just unsettling, but just also like funny. I was just like, what is this? Like, this is just weird. I'm not about it, So yeah, I mean, Cameron, like, I'd love to know sort of your thought process behind introducing this film, maybe your experience watching it and coming around to it or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, what I find interesting with this movie is, I mean, I think like you, because of my faith, and because it's something that actually is more scary than monsters to me. This idea of people who are willing to sell themselves out
Mm.
to to be successful and whatnot, like that actually is something that is more scary than um almost anything else to me. So that's kind of why I enjoy these movies, and especially this movie, because it's not it's not really about Satan worshipers. Like, it kind of is, but for the most part it's about you selling out yourself and your wife and your family to gain success in the present. And that, I think, is actually very dark and
Yeah.
it's a very good commentary. So I think the writer who wrote the book, which this is based on, he was someone who was, I think, very disillusioned with Hollywood, and so he kind of wrote a lot of the elements of this movie, or of the book, as kind of a middle finger in the way to Hollywood, which I think you can kind of see. And the fact that Polanski just keeps it like a total, he doesn't even change a bit of it. He doesn't pretend that it's not, that Hollywood's not a bunch of Satan worshipers. Oh, well, I mean, I guess like he kind of feels that way too,
Yeah.
which is that's kind of interesting. Like, that is something that I don't know. I feel like it's kind of bold on his part in some ways. As someone who's kind of, he's early on, obviously, but as someone
Yeah.
who's kind of entrenched in the Hollywood ecosystem, I think that's pretty interesting that he's willing to put that out there. Um, and to some degree, like, that's what I think. In a lot of ways, this movie, so obviously it's about, someone realizing something terrible about their husband, or terrible about their, the one that they care about, which I think is definitely a real feeling. It's definitely something that people, uh hopefully not often, but I think a lot of people feel it on sort of the micro level. But th- the fact that, so she realizes this thing, not only that he's sort of joined this coven or whatever, but also that he's totally selling her out and selling her future, selling out her, her baby. I think that is pretty deeply unsettling. And that's kind of what I enjoy about the movie most is, um, I don't know. I feel like this movie is not really like glorifying or on the side of the Satan worshipers at all.
Oh yeah.
Um,
No. I mean, like,
so
I agree with you, and it like, I don't know. You're saying like, oh, it's pretty bold of him to like say those things, and he definitely seems like a bold person. I mean, this movie's
well,
contents are like, for 1968. Did not expect to see anything like what I saw in this movie. I mean, there's legit like what, a devil worshipping rape scene or something. I was like, what
Yeah.
is this? You know, like
Which
this
is
is
yeah,
just
which is pretty is pretty bad. Like it's pretty awful feeling. Like it makes you it's not like scary in the traditional sense, but it definitely makes you feel like gross and
yeah.
definitely like leaves you unsettled. And especially that next scene is very uncomfortable. I feel
Yeah.
like that scene is really dark. But
Yeah, yeah, and it's all yeah, it's almost like just as worse. You know, it was interesting. I watched this
yeah.
movie with Jules, which was kind of an experience. But she was drawn into a lot of the commentary around, I guess, like womanhood and some of the conversation around childbirth. She thought the ending was really dumb, and it almost like like for her it felt like any validation or conversation that the movie was trying to have was thrown out the window because of the ending. Like for her, she was more interested in the way that people were treating Rosemary, the character who's having the kid the whole time, and um, sort of the commentary about the man and his, you know, his role while she's being, you know, like she was getting very emotional with like she needs to be taking medicine. Like she was like, what is she doing? Why is she listening to those doctors? You can't trust those doctors. Blah 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 blah. I was like, all right, Juliana, you know, and she and you know, so it was cool to see like kind of her perspective and begin to appreciate aspects of the movie. I think what was tragic about it is just how the ending for her was like, well, that movie meant nothing, you know? And I was like, well, I mean, I'm not going to say that it didn't mean nothing, but it clearly at this point has you not wanting to even consider anything it's saying, you know? Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing that I'll say is a lot of horror movies do this, and it's something that is kind of maybe like a classic flaw in the horror movie genre. I'm
mm,
not sure anybody really has fixed it or figured it out even. You know, like remember Psycho when that end scene where he just like explains the whole plot and you're like, oh, well, okay. You know,
right, right, right.
like that's the same thing. It's like literally the same exact thing as this movie, in a lot of ways, and structurally functions the same way. And I think is just as bad too. You know, like it's just as like not unsettling in like the way that it's meant to do, but like
Right,
it leaves you
right.
being like, oh, that's stupid. But
Yeah, yeah.
the problem is I wouldn't discount the movie because of the ending in the same way that like I wouldn't discount Psycho and the exciting, fun, interesting things that it does just because the ending kind of sucks. Which is true. Like everybody thinks that. Everybody
Yeah.
knows that the ending kind of sucks. This movie is very similar where I'd say like, yeah, kind of forget the ending. Like it's not really about that. And it kind of the problem with horror movies in a lot of ways is that it needs to do something to wrap up. You know, like it needs to
Yeah.
do something to wrap up the story. And I don't think that really suits like a story like this in a lot of ways. And even today, even modern horror movies, I hope we're going to get to watch Hereditary. Because I think I don't want to say anything about the end necessarily, but a lot of the criticism of that movie is that sort of for the last third, it stops being the movie that it was before and starts to just take on traditional horror themes, um, which I think is valid. I think that's an accurate criticism. But this movie is kind of the same way, and I think this is something endemic to the horror genre in a lot of ways. So I would say personally, this is just my take on things. Most horror movies you can kind of just discount the last, like at least the conclusion, maybe a little bit before that.
Mm.
And if it still works, and if the movie still excites you in those ways, without that, I think there's something positive about the movie at the very least. Um, and probably maybe something even more than that. You know, I think the examples for me that where like the end is like good in a horror movie. I mean, I think The Thing has a great ending. Um, I think Evil Dead's ending is great, but that's because it's ambiguous and like
Right.
it's not it's not really meant to conclude the story. Um, I don't know. I think I would say also Texas Chainsaw Massacre has a really good ending, but again, it's one that leaves you scared because it doesn't end. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's um. So I don't know. That's a challenge with horror movies that I think probably we're not going to get over necessarily. We still haven't gotten over to this day. So
Yeah,
um,
it's actually a very interesting subject matter that I haven't really considered, is that what horror movie endings am I drawn to? Because I feel like it's either generic, like we beat the bad guy kind of thing, which I would say that's more with like, you know, you talk about The Thing, or you talk about Alien, or, you know, any of the horror films in the 80s where there's a monster, right? Um, those movies end in a way that's so predictable it's almost like you can forget the ending. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like that's not even anything you
yeah,
think about
yeah,
afterwards because it's exactly what you thought it was going to be. So you're done with it, right? Then there are the horror movies that actually have intriguing mysteries, and you are like you're so desperate to know what happens, and then when they explain it, it kills any velocity that the movie had in the first place, right?
yeah,
Um, and then there's like Evil Dead 2, which is like, you know, balls off the wall. Like we're not even gonna go anywhere you ever expected.
yeah,
And there's something about those endings that I'm kind of drawn to the most.
yeah.
Because I'm not even sure why, but maybe it is just that perfect blending of camp and crazy and scary all at the same time. But I mean, like I've always talked about how Jordan Peele's horror movies, which are very recent, um, like those movies are considered some of my favorites. Especially Us. I love Us, but the ending of Us is just whack. Like it is just it's it is like explaining something that doesn't even make sense, and I don't know if that's blending aside of like the killing the energy of the movie, but also trying to be like the end of Evil Dead, where it's like this is going somewhere I didn't even expect at all. You know, like I don't know. I agree with you, Cameron. I think that's super insightful to be saying like horror movies don't have endings. I think what is just to get back on topic, this movie, like there is something about the ending that you don't want to discount, you know? There's like a
Yeah.
false
Yeah.
ending. There's an ending with her like, you know, getting sedated and then thinking, you know, it's over, right? I'm sorry, I almost spoiled it. I'm trying not to spoil it, right? But then
Yeah.
there's like a revamping of like I don't know how to say it, but it's almost like there's a new objective that's presented within the last 10 minutes, right? And
Mhm, mhm.
suddenly the movie like starts to press on the accelerator again, and that closet that you see at the very beginning comes back, and you're like, oh my goodness, like this is crazy, like what's gonna happen? And like there's that amazing shot where she's looking through the keyhole, she has the knife, right? You're like, oh my goodness, like this is like it's turning up, it's going crazy. And um I'm watching it with Jules, and she's like, yes, 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 like kill them, kill them. And I was like, she wanted a Tarantino ending. I was like, whoa, Juliana, like this is wow. I did not expect
Yeah,
expect this
yeah,
out of
yeah.
you, you know? Uh, just like, and I think it it brings you in, and you're so excited to get back into this this kind of like this train of um like she's kind of back in the game, you know, for a minute, right? Because she realizes too late, and she's running around, she's going to Dr. Hill right at the ending, and she doesn't quite get away, right? But then suddenly like she has this opportunity to have a comeback, right, against her adversaries. And then like you're just so involved when the camera is like behind her, and she like walks into that room with a knife, and like all the people slowly start to notice her, which is a great scene. And then it just devolves
Yeah,
into this
it's awesome.
like zero reaction. Like like nothing happens. Like they're all just like, "Oh, hello," you know, like it's just I don't know, like again,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
movie left me longing for a different film. And it's almost the highest praise I can give this movie, which is weird. I know that sounds weird.
Hmm.
You can hear in my tone that like there's so much that I was intrigued by and so little that I felt rewarded with. And maybe I'm just
Yeah,
being
yeah.
a entertain me kind of viewer, but sorry, sometimes I am, you know? I'm not just going to hand it over sometimes. I'm not just going to be like, "Oh, that was great because it had some good moments." I don't know. This movie had a lot to win over for me and it never did. And I think that's the best I can put it. So,
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I get it. And I get having the reaction of like, oh, that's it. And I would say even the last part is empowering to the character, which again is kind of the point. Like I I think that's obvious, like with the inevitability element of the movie, where it's like the immovable object basically, and there's not like I don't know. It's like something is going to happen. She knows it's going to happen. She wants to believe that it's not going to happen, but it's already done. Like there's no so like the whole movie is disempowering in a very open way. Um, but then at the same time, like, I don't know. I do like that last scene in terms of how it's set up. Like you said, and I also feel like the um I don't know. I'm not sure that I would I'm not sure that I'd be like super happy either way if she like came in like knife swinging like killing everybody or whatever. Like I don't think that's really the tone of the movie in a lot of ways, and
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't really feel like it would serve it very well if that's kind of what happened. I don't know. I'm conflicted, and I hear what you're saying. Like I get it, but in my mind, um this movie stands out as one that kind of, um, despite maybe having something be a bit goofy in the end, being one that's filled with tension in a way that is so subtle that it almost doesn't even feel like it's tense. Like it's so like so here's one thing that I noticed about the movie, and I hope you could speak to this. Um, so I obviously watched this at home in my room, and I have a very good sound system. It's 5.1, so I can kind of hear everything very well. And I noticed that in the scenes where she's in pain, um, or the scenes where she's kind of like being very like anxious and having a lot of anxiety, there's a very low noise, that's almost like a hum. It sounds like feedback from like a microphone or something. Um, I don't know if you noticed this. Did you?
No, I didn't. I did not notice it. No.
So I noticed that there was this low kind of feedback noise, and that it clears up when she gets better, when the pain stops. And I was like, oh wow, that's super interesting, because it was grating on me and I didn't even realize.
Mm.
Like it was grating on me in a way that I was like, yeah, like I felt the anxiety, I felt the sort of the very like subtle pull of, maybe someone in pain or something like that. Like
Yeah.
I felt that, and then when it stopped, it cleared up. And I was like, wow, that's like such a good way to do that.
Yeah.
Like that's
This is super awesome.
such a subtle way to have that, instill that feeling of anxiety, that feeling of tense, almost like grating on your mind, that is imperceptible, that you don't even really notice, that once you do notice it's gone, you feel better for a brief moment, and then it comes back obviously later.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like the so that's what I mean by like this movie is scary in this subtle way, in the way that it's able to kind of prick at you, um on like almost because it's so mundane in a lot of ways, because it's so, um, it's very domestic. It's a movie about two people living in an apartment. There's an old couple in the next room, and they're hanging out. They're getting, chocolate mousse or whatever. Um, and it's not very scary in the traditional sense, but it is very unsettling because of how well it's made and because
Yeah.
of how well the sequences are tied together. And for a brief moment, you kind of wonder if she's crazy. You know what I mean? You kind of wonder if she's going insane. Um, and I think it's done really well in that way. So I don't know. I think this movie has a lot special to it, just in terms of even like filmmaking. Not to mention, I think I do want to get into sort of thematic elements, and maybe we could spoil it and move on there. But um, thematically, I think it also has something interesting to say as well. So
Well, yeah, let's just say moving forward we're going to be spoiler free. I mean, we got 15 minutes left of the episode. We've done our best. This movie's old, so if you've seen it, you've seen it. If you haven't, I mean, I don't know if I recommend it, but it's interesting what you're saying about the sort of some of the design of the movie being mundane, or even like I totally felt like a sense of irritation in this movie.
yeah,
And for a long time, I mean, hearing you say that it's almost part of the design almost makes me scoff at it. Like there's just like, I'm like, well, no wonder. Like, like no wonder I just found it kind of a chore to watch it. And before we started recording, Cameron, you're like, you were telling me, oh, like we might have a theme for this month, and we had a discussion about how we wanted to. There's a lot up in the air with horror month. We want to be able to cater to our audience, but also like Cameron has some cool ideas around it. And one of his ideas was around exploring movies with witches, right? And with this movie on the forefront of my mind, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I was like, I can't do this. Like, and I was like, this movie was just, I don't know. Like, I was genuinely just like, I just don't want to watch anything like that. And sure, some of it is subject matter, but a lot of it was just kind of a pain to get through, And so, there's a side of some people is like, oh, that's the design. And I'm like, I'm glad you're getting off to that, because I'm not like, I don't want to watch that, like it's not anything that I want to sit through. And so I don't know, like kudos to the movie. I love the sound design choices. That's great. It's clearly effective. It's just starting to make me roll my eyes and say like, okay, well, it just seems like more and more this movie wants me to dislike it. And so great. Good for, yay. I'm glad you guys did that, I don't know. Like this film has a lot to say, Cameron. So I'm interested to hear you give some context with no limitation on spoiler. Why don't you just get into it and talk about some of the themes we've touched on, some with its commentary on Hollywood and whatnot. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm definitely interested in hearing kind of what Jules has to say about the movie's thoughts on sort of motherhood and in that way. Because I agree. I think this movie has. Well, okay. Here's what I'll say. Horror movies have, I think, are very effective when they talk about a couple things. I think they're very effective when they talk about adolescence, and sort of growing up, the fears of growing up, maybe social anxiety, those kinds of things. And I think they're also very effective when they talk about parenthood. And I'm not sure why there's often this theme about, maybe it's because those are kind of like the most anxious parts of your life, is like growing up and then, raising someone like that. I'm not sure. So it's possible that there's a lot of emotion wrapped up with that, and not just happiness, but also fear, anxiety, and a lot kind of wrapped, and trauma in some ways. So I think horror movies are an effective vehicle to explore those emotions.
Yeah,
And
and
I'd
that's why
say it's
that's why
funny
I'd
because
say. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Cameron. I think we're having some delay on
no,
here
it's
because
okay. I think we're a
I
little delayed, but
yeah, it's fine. I was gonna, this feels so stupid because I was just gonna make a side joke, but I was gonna say that you're perfectly describing Finding Nemo, which is just a classic horror film. So, anyways, I'll let you continue your
I'm not
thought.
saying that it's I'm not saying it's the only genre that can, explore those things, but um yeah, I mean, I think so in my mind, I don't know, this movie is, well, okay, what I was going to say is there's an element to horror movies as well that a lot of times incorporate things like motherhood in a very deep and interesting way that doesn't get explored as much with other forms of, with other genres, I would say. And I think this movie wraps in a lot of the anxieties of being a mother, along with the anxieties of being connected to someone who you know could just totally like sell you out for no reason, like for their own gain or, whatever else. Like I think that is scary. There is something horrifying about that. Um, and I would say it's an anxiety that a lot of people kind of hold. Um, so I don't know. That's why it's effective in this movie, is because you get the sense that like she really just wants the best for her family. She wants the best for, you know, for her and her partner. And, you know, it hints that he's, it's funny too, because you never see him do anything selfish. You just hear them talk about how he's being self-centered. I guess there is that one scene.
Yeah.
uh, but that's different. That's in the context of, the witches and whatever else. But you never really see him do anything self-centered or do anything kind of um that would seem like very off in that way. You There's that conversation that they have kind of early on where she talks about how he's not there, how he's very wrapped up and self-centered in his own success and blah blah blah. But you don't sense that until too late, I guess.
Mm.
And that I think is very effective in the way that it does that. Um, so I don't know. I like the movie thematically a lot. How it's talking about sort of um, it's talking about partnership and being unaware of things that, you know that could happen, or being hopeful and naive in a way that damages you and damages your future. um and I think there's something very dark about that, that is well explored in this movie.
Yeah, I think you're right on it. I do think that this movie clearly brings forward some of those feelings. I don't know if I was in the place to really want to explore that. I think I found it like the most exciting part of it was seeing Juliana's reaction, honestly, to it, because she was connecting more with some of the conversation around motherhood, and clearly like those are anxieties that she's considered or thought about, or you know sort of explored in some sort of mind map. And so to see it on the screen with someone going through that, she's like, oh my gosh, like this is really pulling me in. All those things kind of just and I've already said this, but with the ending of the movie, it felt like I wasn't able to continue the conversation with those themes, even if they are being continued. I was too distracted to be able to consider them. And it's always fun to have this diagnosis at the end where, we have time to chew on it, right? I've already slept on the movie once and we're doing it in a podcast form. But if I didn't have this podcast, there's no way that I would really even want to dwell on this film that bugged me in a way. And so I'm like, well, it's I can like just your opening statements about this movie has given more context and excitement, but I think that's what this podcast is about, Cameron, right? Is like for someone casual like myself to walk into a film with no context and give my take, which is not going to be everyone's take, but like only to be met with kind of your knowledge and context around it. Hey, I gotta be honest, guys. Like, it makes me feel pretty dumb coming on this show and saying what I think, you know. But I don't mind. Like, I feel like this is part of the process of it, right? Where it's like I want to give my like impressions as honestly as I can, because I feel like some people probably have that experience going into a movie that is well known or recommended or well reviewed, right? Um, and to just be able to expand on that conversation. I think that's the strength of our podcast. That's what I love about it. And Cameron, even your opening statements about the director, it's like, wow, like there's clearly a lot of things I don't know what's going on with this movie. And I don't know whose fault it is. Maybe it's mine, maybe it's part of the movies. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think it's cool. I think there is something special about this movie. The style and the look is beautiful. We haven't talked too much about it. I know I mentioned it a little bit. Technicolor, like what we watched, The Searchers, Sound of Music, or is it Sound of Music? No. The
Yeah,
the
Sound of
one
Music is.
Sound of Music's on Technicolor. There's another one too that we watched. Oh my goodness, I'm totally blanking on what it is.
I'm sure there's been several.
Just an incredible looking movie. Any of the shots on the streets of New York are just super engaging, just because of how it's old and it's beautiful and so detailed that you're just kind of drawn into the way that they do these handheld shots as they're you see their profile as they're walking and whatnot. It's very worth it. Do you want to mention anything else?
In real actual New York traffic?
Yes. It was great. I love that part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll say, like, obviously, it is a gorgeous movie, and one of the things that lends it to be a little bit more scary too is that there's like a claustrophobia, especially like early on in the film. The apartment building feels like very unsettling. It's like kind of disgusting, and like you walk in the early apartment, and you're like, ugh, this is gross. Like, and then she brightens it up, but it still kind of feels like a little bit sickly in some ways. Speaking of sickly, Mia Farrow's performance I think is really good, really compelling. I think she does a great job, like imposing the feeling of suspicion of there's something like overtaking her in a way. I don't know. I think there's a lot there. And I agree with you. Like, I don't think, obviously it's not the scariest movie in the world, but I think thematically it works very well. And I would say is one that, if you haven't seen, it's probably worth a visit. I don't think it's like, it's not like the greatest thing ever, but I think it's a worthwhile movie in terms of its thematic value, its production, the acting, and just like how well it handles these darker topics. I think it's a good example of a horror movie that can kind of still leave an impact on you, but not be like jump scares or making you unsettled in that way. So
yeah. Oh, well, we usually give movies a rating on a scale of for everyone, for casuals, for the curious, for the cinephiles. I'm gonna stamp it for the curious. I don't think it's for cinephiles. I think there are a lot of approachable elements about this movie, but I don't think that it is. I don't know. I think there's a subjective element for me it's giving me a hard time recommending it to casuals. I really do think that this movie's pretty out there with content. For 1968, it's still shocking today. And the resolution and what it's trying to say, I think, has a lot of factors that you have to be able to be, I guess, experienced enough with film to interpret and really appreciate, which I didn't have. I feel like I didn't have that in my viewing, and I'll be honest with that. So yeah, that's why I have to. That's how I feel with it. Cameron, do you feel like that rating is fair, or do you think there's a different rating? You think it's more for the casuals?
No, I agree. I think it's probably for the casuals. Um, no, I guess it's probably for the curious. I think you're right. There's something about it that is not like. I think if you just jumped in, if your last movie was like um, Insidious or like Paranormal Activity or something, and you're like, oh, let's watch a classic horror movie, and you jumped into it, like I don't think you'd be that thrilled.
Mm.
But I guess that's kind of like saying if if your last movie was Captain America Civil War and you jumped into like Apocalypse Now, you'd be like, oh, what is this? So I don't know. It's like I feel like there's something a little bit more elevated about this movie in terms of its artistic value. Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's for the curious.
Mm. Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap up the show because we've hit an hour and 10. Cameron, I know that we forgot to do your hot takes at the beginning of this episode. I also checked the Patreon. Patrons, you
True.
have the ability to write in questions on the show. So write in, because we do check every episode, whether it's going to be at the beginning or the end. Well, it's been at the end because you guys we know that you don't write in. So write in questions, patrons. You have that ability. Cameron, the question for the hot take for this episode, which we usually do at the beginning, is what is your favorite interpretation of the devil in movies? Go ahead, fire away.
Tenacious D in The Pick of Destiny.
That's good. That's a really good choice. I didn't even consider that. For me, I think it has to be what is it? Is it Hades in Hercules? I don't know who voices him, but he is just awesome. Like what an exciting presence that he has, and very funny in that film. So just in theme with the movie. Cameron,
He's
that's
hilarious,
good.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about this hot take section, Cameron. Should we expand it outside of movies? Should I just throw, like, I don't know, topical questions at you? Some sort of, like, political policy questions or something wild? Because you are the king of hot takes. I feel like this has a lot of potential, okay?
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, it'd be fun. We could do, you could take it in any direction that you want. I'll answer your questions.
Let me just put this out there too. If you're a patron, you can affect this section of the show. I am telling you right now, you have full reign to pick Cameron's brain. He is an extremely intelligent individual, if you can't tell from this podcast. I mean, he's well versed on film. You know that I don't think there's anything hotter than that. So, yeah, we're gonna throw all the questions at you, Cameron. You're very knowledgeable on more than just film. So I'm ready. I'm ready to hear some hot takes. That's what people almost know. You just put it on your gravestone. You know, I feel like that's what it's all about with you. So. I think that makes you a great podcaster. Cameron, I'm going to wrap it up. I know we have weird lag. I'll edit it. Hopefully nobody ever hears anything strange on this. Do you have any closing comments?
No.
Okay, well, we post every Monday, so make sure to subscribe to us on however you listen to your podcast. We're excited for Horror Month. We're going to get into it. We have a lot of special things for patrons. Again, our Discord is live. We will have a post on Patreon where you can join that Discord. Even if you are a free member, you don't support us, go to patreon.com/ECFS Productions to get access to that Discord. We're doing a special event where we're watching a movie all together in a live stream. It's going to be awesome. We already tested the tech. I'm excited for that. It's going to be a fun evening. And you can support us there. Vote on what shows or what movies you want us to watch this month. We'll see you guys next Monday. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast that is fully funded on patreon.com. Shout out to our producers, Darren O'Neill and Tim Smith, for supporting the show, and to the rest of you that support us at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. If you want to learn more about the benefits you can get, check out our Patreon. The show cannot happen without you great listeners, so we thank you for all your kindness and support.